And we're live. Hello, it's Melinda from Hope When There Was None. Oh, and Antia, I forgot to tell you, you are my 200th episode.
All right, I love
Yes.
it. Oh my
Yeah, so for my
gosh.
podcast, it'll be number 200. So thank you.
Oh,
Even makes it even
yay.
more special. The 1st of February, I'm kicking off self-love. And what a beautiful topic to talk about romance and attracting somebody that is not Mr. Wrong. So I'm going to let you take it away. You have a beautiful story as it is with your what do you want to call him? Your not your help me, but also just somebody your soulmate. Your
Yeah.
soulmate. So let's dive into that. And I love hearing your story too about you came from communist. Oh my goodness, you have quite a colorful past. And also there's a little bit of emotional issues that you had from upbringing as well. So
Absolutely.
I'm going to shush now. I'll let you take it away.
Oh, awesome, awesome. Well, thank you so much for having me today, Melinda. I'm so excited to be here. And for the women who don't know me, I'm Antia Boyd, founder and creator of the Magnetize Your Man method. And we've helped thousands of single women all over the world for the last 10 plus years to attract that right man to you. So no matter if you're in Sydney, Australia, or London, UK, or in the US, or Africa, we've done it all because people always say, well, like I need to go to different place and there's no good men here. There's no good men there. But let me tell you, I hear that on every single continent. So I mean, but yeah, I'm really excited to be here because, I actually grew up in an emotionally abusive and not narcissistic household. My mom was a narcissist. And to give you like a little bit of a picture, when I was 1.5 years old and I wanted to crawl into her bed because I think I had a nightmare. I mean, at 1.5, there's all kinds of reasons why you want to crawl into your
Right.
mom's bed, right? Like she rolled over and said, "Stör mich nicht," which means don't bother me.
Oh,
And then I started to, of course, as a little girl, to internalize that. But first of all, I went through a shock, right? Because a little girl's not expecting a reaction like that because
right.
she was in the womb of the mom, so she feels like okay, there should be some sort of nurturing response.
Right.
And then after that shock occurred, right, I realized, oh, okay, don't be a burden. Like, don't ask people for something, right? Like, don't express your needs. And then first I was confused, of course, because I knew, wait a minute, I know I have those needs, I know they're authentic, but yet my parent is reflecting back to me a negative
Mm.
response, which then makes me question my needs. And so and again, when we're little, we're actually putting the parent on the pedestal, right?
Right.
Like the parent is the god or the goddess. And so, like, even though it doesn't make any sense, we're actually valuing their opinion more, right? So I'm like, okay, there must be something wrong with me. I don't know what it is, but let me find out what it is. And then meanwhile, let me make sure I don't need anyone. Let me become
Oh,
independent, right? Like I went
right.
grocery shopping by the time I was 8 years old by myself,
Wow.
and I thought that was normal. I thought like my classmates are a little spoiled that their parents would actually drive them to the grocery store. I mean, that's really interesting, right? Because we distort our reality,
Right.
like for an 8 year old to think that, and also how disconnected I must have been already from my needs and my emotions at an 8 year old stage,
Mm.
right? And then
Right.
of course, when it really came to me was when I started dating, because guess who I attracted? I was conflicted inside of myself emotionally, so I attracted men who were also emotionally conflicted inside
Mm.
of themselves, right? Like they
Right.
wanted to express their emotions or their needs, but the other part of them was like, no, I got judged for it, or I had like a really negative response when I expressed that. So
Mm.
they would make me those promises, right? Like you
Right.
always wanted, never expected miracle, right? Only to like just drop off the earth the next moment because it got quote unquote too hot. I mean, literally,
Mm.
right? It's like, when we get close with intimacy, it gets hotter. The heat increases. And so everybody has a different level of threshold when they pull out, when they say, you know what, I need to be my individual again. This is a little bit too much merging for me. That's a little bit too many emotions for me, too overwhelming.
Mm.
And so that's what I experienced, Melinda, day in, day out, year in, year out. Now, because I had learned a little bit about personal development from my dad when I was a teenager, I knew that, I mean, I'm kind of the common denominator of all those experiences,
Mm.
even though the men, all different names and faces, right?
Right.
And that's actually when I decided, okay, let me actually get out of Germany, get into UC Berkeley and study personality psychology to really understand how the dysfunctional dynamic that I had with particularly with my mother,
Mhm.
directly translated into the dysfunctional relationship I had with men, right? Like, because,
Right.
my other friends, they moved in with their guys or they had long-term relationships. I couldn't hold a relationship, Melinda. I called it a situationship. It lasted about 2.5 months.
What?
Or like a reaction ship, you know what I mean? But
Yeah.
like you would never call anything a relationship or like a boyfriend because nothing ever lasted past, 8 to 10 weeks.
Wow.
And that led me also to study a lot of different workshops, masculine, feminine dynamics, understanding men. I mean, you name it, I've done it. Give me the workshop name in my industry, and I've probably done it and taken it. And interestingly enough, a lot of women came to me at my church. They would always know, oh, Antje did this workshop last weekend. Like, what did you learn at that last workshop? And so that's how I started to do like little sort of quote unquote support groups,
Okay.
because obviously I didn't have anything to show for it, but I had a lot of content. You know what I mean? Like, and then I taught the content, and then I gave the women and then the women implemented it. And then out of the sudden, they met their guy. I ended up being invited to their wedding. I was invited to be the maid of honor. And so
Wow.
I know, right? So I was like, wait a minute. So something is actually working. There's like actually like a formula here
Mhm.
that seems to work, right? Because 75% of the women back then, now it's 100, but back then, 75% of the women who were in those little support groups met their man. So that's pretty high. You know what I mean? That's not like that's not an accident
Wow.
chance. You know what I mean?
Right.
Um, and so that's actually when I ended up hiring a mentor for myself, because I realized, wait a minute, so I have the information. It works because I see it with other women, but something is not, I'm not seeing something, right? And what I realized is we all have vulnerability thresholds inside of ourselves,
Okay.
which are our blind spots essentially. And
Mm.
mine was, I actually had one foot in the door and one foot out the door. But I would have never guessed that because I felt like I was doing everything possible to get into a relationship. So when I learned that I had actually a part inside of me that didn't want a relationship, that was actually disassociating, that's actually laughing when it wasn't funny,
Mm.
right? Or that was like kind of thinking, well, in case it doesn't work out, actually secretly playing with the worst case scenario, while on the surface looking like I want, of course, and I'm committed to the best case scenario. That's when, like 9 months later, I met my husband, Brody, my soulmate. And he told me the first night we met that I'm the girl of his story and that we have a huge responsibility to humanity. And so here we are, 8.5 years later,
Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome. But I love that you recognize, or I mean, you were trying to do that work though. I think that's so important that you had courage to step out. You knew something maybe was wrong and that you continued to look and you kept looking and you found all
Absolutely.
this great information. And that's where a lot of women that I know I talk to, they kind of put the brakes on that and they don't take that extra step. So that's I do have another question to ask you. I'm sorry. Your mom, did she come from an upbringing where there was some kind of abuse or situation, or was she going through something?
Oh, yeah. I mean, my mom came from a high level of trauma, of abuse, basically on all levels.
Okay.
Um, and so that's why, and this is interesting, right? Because we, of course, give our parents sort of the benefit of the doubt and compassion. And well, that's, she didn't know better. But also, what I actually learned on my healing journey, that's what my women learn too, is still hold the parents accountable, right?
Hmm.
Like, because
Right.
the truth of the matter is, when she met my dad would like constantly give her self-improvement books, and here's this workshop. And she had many opportunities she said no to. So I get the trauma, right? But I
Right.
do believe that we all have possibilities, that God puts possibilities and opportunities in our way,
Yes, ma'am.
that we have to take the responsibility whether we take them or not to change our life and to start healing. And she chose
Yes.
not to, you know? Yeah.
Oh. And how is your relationship with her now? I mean, she's still
Probably
living or?
like non-existent, I would say. I
Okay.
mean, except like happy birthday and Merry Christmas. Yeah, she's still alive. She's still alive. Um, but yeah, very strong boundaries, right? Because with
Okay, good.
narcissists, especially for those that have narcissistic parents, know that with narcissists you have to set very strong boundaries because they're very invasive, and if you give them the little finger, they take the whole hand. So now it's more just like, mom, this is the little finger, that's it. Like the little finger, and really not even like saying you cut someone off love wise, right? But
Right.
it's more about like loving them from a distance and speaking into their empowered self versus into their victim self, because that's another thing that a
Ooh.
narcissist wants to do, right? The narcissist wants you to speak into that little self, right? Like, oh,
Right.
mom, I know you didn't know better. You went through all of this, and like, no, that's like food for them. You need to actually remind them of how powerful they are by themselves, that they don't need you.
That is so, wow, I got goosebumps. That's very powerful. And I like that you have those boundaries. I know many survivors and even some that are still enmeshed in abusive situations with their family have a hard time bringing up those boundaries because this is mom or dad or grandma, grandpa. They have a hard time stepping away and they still feel obligated to go to those holidays, even though that other parent's there. So that is really remarkable. If you could speak to someone that has those issues, what advice would you give to somebody like that? And then we'll get on to magnetizing your man. But what advice
Yeah.
can you give them?
I mean, like I said, I think the biggest thing for me is actually understanding that everybody chooses their destiny by the choices that they make. And just really saying, mom, this doesn't belong to me, right? Because we take on the weight and the story of the parents, right? And
Right.
actually, really having almost like a ritual and saying, like, this was never mine to carry. This is
Mm,
yours to carry. You chose that, right? Like, certainly you didn't choose the experience, like, no, you didn't choose like what actually happened, right? But
right.
you choose like the interpretation of the experience you had. Like, that's your choice. That's your conscious choice. And you can choose something different.
Mm,
And so that helped me a lot. And then also grieving, because it's almost like the little girl has to grieve that she will never be able to save the narcissistic parent, because like the little girl at least wants to save the parent, right? And once she
right.
actually goes through the grieving process that she simply can't, and that she has to accept in that moment the helplessness and the powerlessness that comes with that, then she's free. Then she's no longer, okay, I have to actually attach. I actually have to do all the things. And it's a good question because my clients ask me this all the time.
Wow, that's powerful. That is powerful. Oh my goodness. Now, okay, now you're gonna have to sprinkle on some magic because I know there's people out there like, what is the magic? How did you make that magic
How, when you say like magic, you mean
to
how?
attract your soulmate?
Yeah, and I think it actually goes hand in hand because because we talk about self-love too, which is actually receiving all parts of you, right?
Mm,
So we
right.
love to see ourselves and perceive ourselves as the sort of accomplished person, or the compassionate person, or the considerate person. But can you also embrace like your inner narcissist,
Mm,
right? Because what I knew was, okay, if I judge my mom for her being a narcissist, right? Then that means somewhere inside of myself, because I do a lot of shadow work with my women, right? So you spot it, you got it kind of thing. So if
mhm,
you resonated with it and you actually see it in someone else, that means you have it.
mhm.
And so that's a little bit being honest with yourself, right? So I had to be
Okay.
honest with myself and be, ooh, where am I selfish? Oh, that's a very uncomfortable like conversation, because now I'm supposed to be like mom, like, what? No, this is the last person I wanted to be like.
Mhm.
But that's why David Data, he talks about dance like your mother. And that's what he means, right? He's actually saying, not saying, I'm never going to dance like my mother, like I'm never going to do that. No, it's actually like stepping into the very thing, into the very behavior, but then also seeing that you have a choice
Mhm.
in that. So owning it. So let's say, Melina, if you were to tell me, well, Antje, you're so selfish, I'd be like, absolutely, I can be. Right? So that there's no like apologizing or like, oh no, sorry, oh no, I'm making it up to you. And the last thing I want is to be considered selfish. No, 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 then you don't get it.
Right.
There's no magic in that, there's just people pleasing and an authenticity and lack of alignment. But if you can actually say, you know what, the truth is, I can be selfish. I sometimes want the last piece of cake
Oh,
and I'll eat it too.
you were speaking to me, girl. You
I
said cake.
mean, yeah. You know what I mean?
Right. No, no, no. That's perfect. That's a perfect example. Yes, I get that. And yes, I'm selfish. Yes, I am. I will fight you for that cake. I will.
Yeah. But
Yes.
feel how freeing that
It
feels
is.
inside of your system to be like,
Right.
oh, I can finally acknowledge what I really want.
Right.
I don't have to pretend anymore.
Oh,
Or like say, well, that's how I feel, but everybody else's needs are more important than mine. No, they're not. So make a scene, make some noise, take up some space. And whatever people throw at you, I mean, that's the work that I do. It's not like that easy, right? But like, um, it's like actually saying, yeah, totally. I was at a women's conference that must have been, I don't know, 4 years ago, 3 years ago, something like that. And I was on the panel, and the leader or the organizer of the event was saying, well, Auntie, you know what? You're kind of borderline arrogant. And I'm like, oh, next, another opportunity to embrace another quality inside of myself that I have a lot of resistance towards, right?
right.
So it was awesome. So we did like a whole arrogance dance and be like, I'm so arrogant. I'm rubbing it all over myself. And so we just started to have like fun with it, like versus having this shame reaction that we normally have, right? Like normally people
Right.
would be like, I'm leaving the conference. Oh my God, just 100 women in the audience just heard this woman say that I'm borderline arrogant. And oh my God, how embarrassing is that? She totally embarrassed me in front of everybody. Versus like, no. Like women were like, what's she doing over there? Why is she now dancing? And
I absolutely love that. I know, well, it's my ex, but he called me the B word, and I
mm-hmm.
embrace that. It's like, oh, no one ever calls me that. Awesome. Really
Ooh, I love
cool.
it.
Yes,
Yes.
yeah, I do. I love that. So ladies out there, let's start some dancing. Yes, embrace that. And yes, we're none of us are perfect. Yeah,
Absolutely.
none of us are perfect. Yes. And I like that. I do. Embracing that, those messy parts, those inner things that aren't always so pretty and they come out. Yes.
And what does that have to do with attracting the right man is because when we reach a certain level of intimacy with a man, because for a lot of women that come to me, attracting the man itself is not the problem. It's more they're starting to sabotage themselves and dynamic changes and the
Yes.
man starts ghosting and you know and part of the reason is because the woman is still kind of like managing his perspective of her, his perception of her, right? Because she has the story that if when he really finds out
Mm,
who she really is, which is insecure, feeling inadequate, feeling not good enough, you fill in the blanks, right?
right.
Then he will run. So what she does is she overcompensates for it, right? She's like making sure I'm independent, that he doesn't think I'm needy, and making sure, he sees I'm secure. So like not don't share too much, don't cry too much, don't collapse too much, right? But if you done the work, then you're not afraid to be quote unquote found out about anything. You know what I mean? Like if the
Right.
man's like, "Oh wow, you're really a lot." Yeah, I can be a handful, can I? Right? So you can actually own that and you can have fun with it, and a
Right.
man is gonna love it.
And I'm thinking of, just sometimes you see this in movies where a woman wakes up like hours before her mate so she could get her hair pretty, put on that lipstick, and look like she just woke up like a princess. But for myself, I couldn't do bodily sounds that are natural in front of my husband, Mr. Awesome. I would go sneak away to like a bathroom or something to let it, if you know what I mean, the bottom half
Mm-hmm.
go after having beans or beer. That just reminded me of that. So I've been giggling here thinking about, yeah, I couldn't do that. I couldn't feel free enough to let him see those little stinky and
Mm-hmm.
messy parts, burping or anything like that. I couldn't do it. And I know why. That was because of my poor self-image, things that I heard, I was considered a pig if I did that from my
Mm-hmm.
previous partner. So I always kept it inside. And then
Mm-hmm.
finally, it just let it fly. He's like, "Oh,
Mm-hmm.
wow, that's really big." Or, "Hey, I didn't know you woke up like that. Your hair's out to here," and just crazy things like that. Yeah. Yeah. So I get
Absolutely.
that. I felt
Absolutely.
comfortable in my own skin, but when I started doing that self-care and that self-love, and can you do me a favor and describe, I was just talking about shadow work this morning, just briefly. I just said the word. Can you explain what shadow work is, please?
Oh, it's actually very simple. You work on the attributes and qualities inside of yourself that you judge in other people, right? Or judge inside of yourself. So, like, you just write down what you don't want to be called. I don't want to be called abrasive. I don't want to be called rude. I don't want to be called mean or, whatever it is, right? So, whatever qualities you have that you have a hard judgment and resistance inside of yourself, that's the work to transform the relationship to those qualities. I do that with my women all day long or all week long. I would say, just post your qualities and we'll refine them, so to say. You know what I mean? We reverse the relationship you have with them, and they're like, "Well, Antia, this one, you for sure you can't find anything positive with that." I'm like, "Well, let's go," and we're doing it. We're finding a positive association with that quality to fully own inside of yourself. And so that's like, because that's the freedom, right? Because now I don't
Right.
need to tiptoe around. Now I don't need to walk on eggshells,
Mm.
or I need to make my husband or my partner walk on eggshells because they can't say certain things because
Right.
I'm going to flip out and I get reactive.
Wow. Okay. That's good. That's good stuff. That's all good stuff. So doing that inner work is attracting, well, it's boosting your confidence, is boosting your self-esteem, but it's also going to attract that positive person that you're trying to get into your life. Now, would you suggest that someone starts working on themselves before they start attracting or trying to attract somebody or start dating?
I think there's two kinds of women. There's like the kind of woman that I was that actually grew more outside of a relationship. I developed much faster, which obviously, that's why I was single my whole life. And then there's other women who really grow in relationships and they implement all the principles extremely well, right? Because they get instant feedback. So I don't think there's like one right answer. Like
Okay.
I have 50-50 of women that come to me don't have a man in mind or don't have already somebody that they're sort of dating or have an eye on. The other 50% have someone, right? And both of them get results. So I would not say necessarily that there's like a
Okay.
rule for that.
Okay. Okay. And is there like, I know there's red flags out there and green flags and yellow flags and so on and so on. Are you teaching them to look for that, or is that something that should just come naturally when they start improving themselves?
Well, it depends, right? Because sometimes what happens is when I talk to women and they say, first this guy was so great and he love bombed me and all the things, and then he ghosted me. And I said, the truth of the matter is that there were red flags, but you were probably coloring them green
Mm.
on the first dates,
Ooh.
because maybe he was just talking about himself, or uh, maybe he wasn't really attuning to you and you just kind of felt like it was a little bit disassociated, the answer you gave. But then you gave him the benefit of the doubt, you're just like, he probably's just busy, or he's probably, oh, he said like his dad just died, or, oh, this just happened, right? So we then go into excuse making. But I do believe that we women are all intuitive enough to pick up on the red flags, right? So what I help my women with is actually let go of questioning and doubting themselves, and actually learning to fully trust themselves so they can also trust other people, right? So it's almost like that the people that they attract into their life, particularly men, are actually trustworthy, right? Because if they don't trust themselves, they don't trust other people.
Mm.
And then, of course, they attract men into their life who also are not trustworthy, right? Which means they
Right.
don't follow through on their, right? They're like, oh, he said, he's going to call me, but then he didn't call me. But, he did have a busy week. No, he broke his agreement. He said he's going to call you, and he's not calling you, so yeah. So there's, of course, like some red flags. I have my YouTube channel. It's like, you can check that out. Where there's, of course, but again, this is just sort of in the moment. I love that you just put your glasses on when I said that.
Yes, I can see. It's like, oh, there we go. There's the
Yeah.
YouTube chat.
So there is like things like when a woman, so, if it's like in the very beginning, like, okay, the woman's learning to trust herself. Okay, she needs to find even some path at all, right? So it's kind of important to be like, okay, if this guy doesn't follow his words, like that's a red flag, right? Or if he doesn't introduce you to his friends, that's a red flag, right? Or if you never meet his parents, that's a red flag. If you never go out in public with him, that's a red flag, and so on, right? So there's like many, he hides his phone. He has his phone upside down, downside up, or whatever it's called,
Right.
all the time. That's a red flag. So of course there's like those little markers, but over time and long term, you actually want to learn more to trust yourself intuitively, right? That you feel like, you know what? Something in my gut just tells me, I don't know what it is, but I still can take it seriously, right? Like I don't need to have know the whole story. Like I can still trust myself that I don't know what it is, but I'm just gonna be a little careful here. You know what I mean? I'm treading
Right.
lightly with this guy. And let's actually kind of see what happens here, right? Versus like jumping all in.
Right. Right. Yeah, because you hear that, and then there's some times where that works. Know each other for 2 weeks, they get married, and it's fine. But then sometimes it's scary, especially if they don't listen to their gut. Definitely. And you mentioned your YouTube channel, and I'm just going to talk about you've got a website here, you've got your group. Can we chat about your group?
Yeah, it's my free Facebook group. So we're like almost 7,500 women in there.
Wow.
And yeah, there's exactly those kind of questions that we're discussing. Like this guy, I went on a date with him last night, and then he invited me again on Sunday, and it was all great. And he told me I'm the one, and now it's 3 days later, and I haven't heard from him,
Mm.
and all those things, right? Like, what should I
Right.
do? What should I say? So that's like what the support Facebook group is all about. So definitely recommend joining that, because I'm always so amazed. I can't even keep up. It's like, you post something, and then 5 minutes later it's like 68 comments on there. Like support, from other women. So it's very inspiring to watch, because we all have our experiences and
Right.
can share them.
Right. And that's nice that they can all hold space for one another. That's beautiful.
Like most women join because they're looking for community. They're
Yeah.
looking for a safe place of like-minded women who are like, my girlfriends are all in relationships. I want to be surrounded by women who are on the same path like me.
Right.
They're dating and they're figuring it out, or they got divorced and now they got back into the dating game, or whatever the case may be.
Right, right. Oh, I like that. I like that. I won't be in there. I'm sorry. Happily married.
Yeah.
That's awesome that you have that resource. And I do have these links that you see scrolling. They're actually in the comment section. Speaking of comments, I think there might be a few, so I'm going to go on over there. Now, Joe, thank you for watching. You are amazing. I appreciate that. She's got a lot of comments. You might want to check them out a little bit later, ma'am. And
All
just
right.
to see, she does have quite a few. She talks about boundaries and so on. She is happily married. She has her own night as well. She's from Australia and he is from Ohio. So they kind of had this long distance thing going
Mm-hmm.
on, but I love her story. I do. I do. But she's got a lot of information out here that you might want to touch on a little bit later. A little bit later. Thank you, Joe. I appreciate that. And again, a lot of your comments, excuse me, your banners are in here inside the chat if anybody wants to reach out. And you're on Instagram. You're like all over. Oh my gosh, you're like a ninja.
I'm everywhere. I'm
And
omnipresent.
this has got to be a busy month for you though, since Valentine's Day is right around the corner.
Yeah, absolutely. January and February are always like the months because, the women become aware of like, okay, it's another Valentine's Day. What can I do, like
Right,
to attract the right man into my life and have that be the last Valentine's Day
right,
without a
right.
rose.
Oh, and I want to say I'd love to just give you a big hug, your little inner child, because that's just heartbreaking for me just to hear that. It really is like, oh, I can't imagine saying that to my children. And what I heard when I started doing this is to be the person that you always wanted to be as a child. And so that's what I strive for. And even with raising my own kids, I always tried to be that person that I wanted to be. I wanted for me, excuse me, as a child. My mom was awesome. But that's what I kind of look for for myself to do, to treat other people and to raise my kids as well.
Totally.
Really, really and truly, I think we should all do that. We really should. And you've got, oh my gosh, what else do you got there? Your website here. Sorry. And you have Instagram. I think I got everything.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Yeah. So what's up for you next? Do you have any big webinars, any other big events coming up?
Yeah, so our next thing will be my free masterclass on February 12th, which is, of
Ooh,
course, ladies, I don't let you down on Valentine's Day weekend. You know what I mean? That's, of course. So you can join that. Like, I'm going to leave the link wherever I can leave that with you, Melinda. I don't know exactly
yes.
yet what it is.
Okay.
And until then, like, definitely take the free quiz so that you actually know where you stand, mymquiz.com. Highly recommend that because, it's really important to actually see exactly what are the blocks, what are the challenges, see what's really getting in the way. A lot of women actually report that they gain a lot of clarity. It's actually really interesting because the reason why we're not moving forward is actually because we don't have clarity, right? I would say
Right.
clarity is queen. And that the quiz will provide that for you, and potentially will also offer a call with me, but will definitely come with a couple of free gifts at the end as well. And again, so that's mymquiz.com.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful. And you touched on something a little earlier too. I know and I recognize within myself that when I was dating, um, anybody that seemed nice, oh, he's too nice, or he's too much like a brother I never had, or something like that. I would really sabotage those relationships because I didn't feel that I was worthy, that I was good enough, and it just seemed that they were weird because they seemed so normal. Is that something that you run across?
Oh, that's actually exactly how I felt when I met my husband. And of course, my women are now going through, right? Because
Mhm.
what happens is if we're used to a dynamic that's highly dysfunctional, so it's really like your nervous system is used to that. That
Mhm.
means your whole emotional guidance system is off, right? It's completely distorted. And you're going to only feel attraction to men who have that sort of this evasiveness or like this being elusive kind of energy, right? Which of course is actually not what you want. And then when you encounter a man who actually is healthy and secure and congruent, it's like for one, it's going to feel boring, right? Because it's not has those ups and downs and this
Right.
hot and cold and those massive amounts of contrasts, right? And it's like they just follow up, and it's also like an even keeled energy. When I met my husband, not only did he tell me that I'm the girl of his story, but he just followed up, and it's not a big deal. And he told me, he texted me, I'm going to call you at 5 to talk about where we're going to meet on Friday. And then he called me at 5 and we talked about where we meet on Friday. And it's just very predictable, right?
Right.
But for someone who's so used to like uncertainty and like not knowing, that's like, are we going to meet? Are we not going to meet? There's like so much movement inside of the system that almost when you're with a secure man, there's not that much movement in the system, and it almost feels a little bit like a foreign body, right?
Mhm.
That you almost
Right.
want to push out because what happens is yeah, it's kind of like foreign body that the body doesn't recognize. It's like, what am I supposed to do with this? He doesn't feel like a friend because maybe you kissed. So that was the case with my husband and me. So I'm like, okay, that's not friends. Don't do that. But it also doesn't really feel like this massive spark and passion and all the things, So is that's also not a relationship? Like, so what is that? Friends with benefits? I mean, I was just like, I felt like a free fall, right? Like
Right.
helpless, not knowing. I always like to know things. Like when my women who come to me, they like to know things. They like to be right, and I had to be willing to be wrong, and I had to be willing to be confused short term. And then I think the biggest thing actually was, and I think that's what happens unconsciously,
Mhm.
is that those men are actually giving you what you always wanted, but because you never got it, you don't have the capacity to receive it. Like, so you don't feel safe to receive it, right? It
Right.
almost feels too overwhelming for your nervous system when the man is like all of a sudden calling you regularly or leaving you flowers in front of the door. By the way, all true stories from my clients, or leaving you the favorite chocolate in front of your door, or writing you a nice card, inviting you out to a nice dinner, like all those things. And then women push back and almost become like those bitches.
Right.
And I'm like, no, I don't deserve this. Are you nuts? Or, let me show you who I really am, because you must have the wrong impression of me. Because if you knew who I really was, you would not treat me like a queen. Like you wouldn't, because I truly don't deserve it. Right? So it's this fear to be seen. And that's why so many women actually, oh, I have so many clients come to me all the time with this, um, and then sabotage it, right? And they're like, oh, I'm not that interested, not that attracted. I know right out of the gate, Antia, if I'm attracted to him or not. Yeah, I'm like, well, that's the wrong person, okay? If you know right out of the gate that you're attracted to them, that's your system actually signaling to you, danger, danger,
Mhm.
get the heck out of there. That's the red door you don't want to go through. But women are like, oh, this sounds great. My hormones are up and down. It's love. And then, they go down the
Right.
same rabbit hole again until they're sick and tired of it and try the other route.
Right, right. And I even went to my divorce was final. I left in 2009. My divorce was final in 2012 in August, and I was marrying the man of my dreams, my prince, my shiny knight there. And the night before we were supposed to get married, I told him I didn't want to. I was scared. I was afraid. And the reason why, because sabotaging, I thought in my mind, the minute he puts that ring on, he's been this nice guy for 3 years, 3+ years now. The minute that ring gets on my finger, he's going to change. And there had never been any type of alerts or warnings that went off that he was going to become abusive like my ex. But for some reason, my rational mind or
Mm-hmm.
irrational mind thought that the minute that ring goes on, that's it. He's going to treat me the way my ex did. I did marry him. I did end up marrying him. But you know what? He was so sweet. He's like, you know what, babe, if you don't want to get married, we don't have to get married. We can still do what we're doing. That's fine. And he was so sweet and loving. He was, you know what? I'll tell you what, see how you feel in the morning. And if you still feel this way, then fine. It's okay. We'll just have a big barbecue with everybody. And that was it. So, yes, I had those moments. I totally understand that. I totally get that. And I think that's a normal thing that many of us go through, especially jumping out of a toxic relationship like that. I thought it was really weird for me, but when you're saying that, now I feel validated and how I felt back then. And I'm glad I did marry him, but I do feel validated. So, thank you for validating my feelings.
Of course. Yeah, and I mean, I was in the same boat with my husband. I mean, the night before he proposed to me, I was the biggest bitch because I do believe that we can kind of feel when we're at a certain deeper level of intimacy, when something leads to the proposal or something deeper, and then unconsciously we're testing because it's almost like looking at when the other shoe's gonna drop.
Right.
And it's like, oh, it's probably this. It's probably this. So let me like right out of the gate be a bitch. And then he, changes his mind. But, it's just like your husband, mine proposed to me the next day. So he's like, that was his way of responding to my attempt to push him away. Right. And I literally it wasn't the movie like reaction. You know what I mean? It was literally
Right.
just me freezing in place, like just like leaving my body,
Yes.
feeling like I'm in the Twilight Zone
Yes.
because it didn't make any sense, right? Because we have this whole worthiness conversation that I need to do all those things and I need to um, deserve love. That's like another thing. No, you don't need to deserve love. How crazy is that? You don't need to do anything. You know, love, you are love, right? Like you
Right.
can totally mess up. You can do the wrong thing with the right energy and you're still going to get the right outcome.
Right. Oh, so there is hope, ladies. There is hope. There really is. There really is. And speaking of you and your soulmate there, you have a little one coming very soon.
Absolutely. Yeah. And
I'm
I
so
think
excited.
with having her on the way, um, one thing that Brody and I always decided since we met 8.5 years ago to create everything consciously,
Okay.
right? So we're really like, how do you create your life consciously by design versus by default, right? Like lots of people are just like, whatever happens, happens. And we've just like, no, we had kind of time frames when we wanted to have our first baby and we had time frames, how long it would take us to build the business. And we did a world trip in 2018 for 5.5 months. So we designed everything consciously, right? So that we can actually be fully present with the next stage of our life, right? Versus then realizing, oh man, I wish I would have done this, or oh no, like I'm now totally out of order. So yeah, so that's like a magical story in and of itself.
Oh, that sounds like a wonderful adventure. It really does. And I'm so glad you got your happily ever after. I think that's marvelous. I really
Oh,
do.
thank you.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
I'm
Do
still
you,
getting used to it.
right, right. Because it is, even though it's been so long, it's still, every day is still a thing where it,
Absolutely,
yes.
absolutely. Well, it's like and I think that's what women have to understand, right? Because I think there's a little bit like there's not the right expectation. It's not understanding that no, you learn love again, as if you're like learning to crawl again, right?
Right, right,
So like a baby doesn't just go running just because now she knows what love is. It's like no, 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 no. It's like she's still learning to crawl, and then she's gonna fall, and then she's gonna. Oh, that's what love is. Oh, I forgot what love is. Yep, yep. Okay, got it. Oh, that's how I receive love. Okay, got it. That's how this feels safe to receive. So when we actually like give ourselves the benefit of the doubt, then we'll sabotage ourselves less because we don't expect to be like, "Huh, I should be okay now 8.5 years later. I should finally be, this is the new normal. And there's days like that, right? But there's
right.
also days where it's like, wow, my clients are always saying they want to have a Brody. How did I magnetize a Brody,
And I'm sure for somebody out there that's never had, maybe they grew up in a situation where they didn't know what love is. So just
hmm
learning what love is or how to love, that's going to take a little while too. I mean, take a hot minute.
And it takes also communication as well,
Oh,
never
yes.
making assumptions. When you say that, what does that mean to you? Brody and I, we do this all the time. And I'm always shocked. I'm like, oh, I thought that meant this to you. It didn't. Okay. So what does it mean to you? So, we always have those assumptions, right? We fill in the blanks and fill in the gaps. And that's also one of the things that you learn on your path of many things is actually communication.
Yes, yes, because I had to learn how to fight, or have an argument, a normal argument, without someone being verbally abusive or physically abusive. I didn't know what
hmm
that looked like. I had no
hmm
idea. I was so used to when someone raises their voice, that they're going to become heavy-handed or call me names.
Right.
So when Mr. Osman and I had our very first argument, I was sitting there with clenched fists, waiting for that other shoe to drop, waiting,
Yeah.
stepping at eggshells. Is he going to hurt me? What's going to happen? And none of that ever happened. It didn't.
Of course not. Yeah,
Yes.
exactly. Yeah, and it's the same. I mean, I grew up, as you know, in a verbally abusive household. Now, I was lucky enough to never get got hit. I never got hit, so that's definitely one blessing. Um, but verbally very aggressive. So to me, it was like every time when I had like a great idea, when I would disagree with something, my dad would be like, "Who do you think you are?" And he would get like really upset, and I would, and it would be really to the extreme, until he doesn't have a voice anymore. So
Wow.
so there's always like this part inside of ourselves where we have our parents' response. We're like, "Oh my God, is he gonna flip out? Is he gonna lose it? Is he gonna?"
Right.
Or what happened in my case is I became the rage monster because I couldn't risk that somebody else would become that. So unconsciously, this was not conscious at all. I had no clue. I never lived together with a man until I met my husband. But this rage monster came out of me. And then an Ayurvedic healer said, "Oh, the pulse of your dad is literally the anger of your dad is literally in your pulse."
Wow.
Right? And I'm like, that makes so much sense. But I was so focused on healing all this narcissistic abuse from my mom
Mhm.
that I never even thought about the whole anger distortion conversation with my
Wow.
dad. And I never realized that I had that much rage and anger inside of myself. Because remember, I was emotionally numb
Mhm.
until I finally felt safe, right? Like with
Right.
our husbands, once we feel
Mhm.
unconditionally loved,
Yes.
unconsciously, I'm not saying we're doing this consciously, I'm not saying we're testing them consciously, but then actually all of us is coming to the surface
Right.
because it finally feels safe because it's
Right.
been suppressed for so long. So yeah, absolutely, I get that. And then again there's the shadow work again, right? So then I got to embrace my rage monster and my meanness and my anger, and then learn how to turn that into gold.
And see, I know I need to still work on that because I have liver issues. I do
Mm-hmm.
reflexology and I can feel that. And I know anger, a lot of
There's
that is
liver.
in the liver. But
Mm-hmm.
also, I've helped if we talk about the chakras here, I used to have chronic sore throats. I mean, all the time. I was always sick with a sore throat. And I know that was because I wasn't able to speak my truth, to speak my words. I had to hold it in. Once I broke free, I didn't say once, I noticed it probably about the second year after leaving that relationship that I was sore throat free. I hadn't gotten sick again with a sore throat every once in a while, but not chronically. It was amazing and how I didn't have that tension in my throat anymore. I didn't feel like I was like always felt like I had something like a rock or I was ready to
Mm-hmm.
cry. And so it was very freeing that I noticed on my healing journey these little things, just
Yeah.
little things. It's baby steps and it's very small. And as you mentioned, you know, it takes a while to get to where you are right now. It didn't happen overnight. You did a lot of work in order to get to where you are. So anybody watching or listening to this right now, please know it's not a transformation that's going to take overnight. That she did a lot of work, but she's here for you. She's here to help you and walk with you through that. All these great links. If you're listening on the podcast, you can find those links in the description. Now, do you have any closing comments, any words, anything else you'd like to add before we close?
Um,
I didn't mean to
I
put you on the
think like
spot.
the biggest thing is I think is like whatever happened, quote unquote, in your life, it's really there it happened for you, So like even if you don't believe that, but how can you actually see it from that perspective?
Mm,
Because I always see we distort our reality based on our unconscious expectations. So what if you turn your unconscious expectation to life is working for me, not against me, right? So, for
yes.
example, you were just talking about your throat. I had acne, the worst acne on the planet in my teenagerhood. And of course, it's pretty typical for a teenager too, but not to that extent where you basically have a mask, like a crust around your whole face, right?
Mm,
But to me, the blessing was, well, for one, it was the suppressed anger, right?
okay.
The ugliness, the rage, the shadow that I didn't want to embrace externally, and then
Mm,
of course internally. But it was also actually denial of the feminine. So the masculine hormones were
mm,
so out of balance because that's what it means when you have acne. Yeah,
mm.
you have a massive amount. So I'm like, wow, yeah, totally. I'm like feminine. What's that? Like emotions. What's that? Like totally numb. And so that actually helped me, to understand myself internally much more because otherwise I would have just been able to live a superficial life. and just continue to numb, right? And not
Right.
deal with anything. So, whatever you're going through, whatever issues you have physically, to be just like, this is working for me. This is for me. This is not against me. This is not happening to me.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. So if anybody's listening, please do me a favor, reach out. If you're struggling with those relationships, you're trying to find Mr. Right, by all means, send her a message. Now, I do have to ask you something that just popped up in my head. Will you have something for the guys in the future?
Oh, we used to have, my husband worked with men for 10 years, but we don't have it anymore. I know, I know. We used to. Well, they can go to my husband's YouTube channel for sure, Broderick Boyd. That's
Okay.
still active. And they can watch some of his YouTube videos there. And I think he has a podcast too, which was called Win the Woman. So you can
Awesome.
watch like old episodes. He's definitely, he knows a lot about the masculine and how to feel empowered in that for sure.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful. And if I could trouble you, either put them in the comments or you can send them to me and I'll put that in the comments and also your webinar that's coming up too.
Totally.
So
Yep. Hmm.
definitely, definitely. Well, thank you all for tuning in. I appreciate it. Thank you. And you've been such a blessing. Thank you. You inspired me and I'm married. So thank you. So thank you for tuning in. I hope you have a great rest of your day. Mwah. Please stay safe and I'll see you soon. Bye.
Bye.